Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar presentation, Will Visa Priority Dates Get Better or Not? Our focus today is going to be on the June 2025 Visa Bulletin with a view towards considering what the next several months heading into 2026 may look like from a priority date perspective. My name is Ron Hoppe. I have the pleasure of serving as CEO of Worldwide Health Staff Solutions, and I'm joined today by Dwight Meifeld. I'll introduce Dwight more fully here in just a moment. As we prepare to dive into our subject today, I would ask that you take just a moment and let us know where you're joining us from today. You can use the chat section on your screen and just drop us a line to say, list off for us the country where you are joining us from today. I see we have someone greeting us from Kenya. Always good to have applicants and candidates from countries all over the world joining us. As we go through our presentation today, I would also invite you to record or send us any questions that you may have about the subject matter today, priority dates, visa bulletin, processing times. Please send us your questions using the chat section of the screen. We will not today be able to answer case-specific questions. If you are currently a Worldwide Health Staff candidate, as always, please communicate directly with your assigned case manager. They're in the best position to help you. But all questions are welcome. And towards the end of our presentation, Dwight and I will do our very, very best to answer those for you. So thank you again for joining. The recording of this presentation will be available tomorrow, 24 hours from now, on our YouTube channel, Worldwide Health Staff Solutions YouTube. You can feel free to review all or a portion of this presentation on demand. And you can also feel free to share the link to this presentation with any of your friends or colleagues that you think may benefit from the information that will be shared here today as well. So with that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce to you this morning local time here, Dwight Meifeld. Dwight is someone that I've known for many years. Dwight is an immigration attorney with almost 30 years of experience in the area of immigration law. Dwight currently works with Thompson Hine, a large national law firm with offices across the United States. And Dwight is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Dwight, thanks for being with us today. It's great to have you join us, and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Ron. I'm very happy to be here this morning.
All right. So, Dwight, as we jump into our presentation and talk about visa processing times, CJ, if we can get to the next slide, I think it would be helpful just to ground ourselves and just ensuring we have a correct understanding of priority dates. And Dwight, if you could just comment briefly on how priority dates are determined.
So what happens is in every green card case, there are two parts to the process. And the first part is an application that the employer files with the government that says, I would like to get a green card visa for this individual. And then the second part of the process is that for most healthcare professionals who are outside the US, they go to the US consulate in their local area and they claim the visa that the employer has asked for. Each year, the US government makes available 140,000 green card visas based on employment as opposed to family visas, which is a different number. And if more than 140,000 people apply, then a wait list gets created. And on the day that the employer files its application with the government that says, we'd like a visa for a green card for this individual, a priority date is issued. And that's essentially the equivalent of a ticket to get in line and wait for your turn to be able to go to the consulate and claim your green card. Each month, the Department of State releases something called the Visa Bulletin, and that's a report that tells you how far your place in line has moved forward or sometimes backwards. And essentially, the reason that the line moves backwards sometimes is that the government is always trying to adjust the processing of these cases to make sure that when they get to the end of the year, they've only given out 140,000. So if they move the line a little bit too fast the previous month, they may back it up. So it doesn't always move forward. But generally, what the Visa Bulletin does is gives you a sense of how far your place in line is progressing. And what I would say is perhaps in this entire process, the single most important thing that you want to be moving towards as quickly as possible is getting that application filed by the employer so that you get your place in line and you can start waiting for it to become current.
Right. Very good. We'll explore that thought, Dwight, a little further in a moment. I think that what you touched on there is really key. Given that the priority date really reflects the date on which your application was put into process, it establishes sort of where you are in the processing queue. I think the next thing I'd like us to do, CJ, if we can get to the next slide, is just to take a look for a moment of where we are currently at with processing times. So we have a chart here, a graph with a number of bars, and I'll make just a couple of comments, and then I'll ask Dwight to add any further thoughts. So this graph here is showing us visa processing times in months, measured in months, going back to 2018. And what we can see very obviously here is over the last 5 or 6 years, visa processing times have fluctuated pretty consistently. You'll see kind of towards the center section of the graph, there's this period of time where the processing times remain the same. You'll see that flat section there in the middle. This is what the processing times were around and through and shortly after COVID. There was the impact of COVID did impact the way that visas were being processed, and I'll ask Dwight to just elaborate on that a little bit here in a moment. But what you can see, aside from just the obvious variation in the processing times, is that if we look at the last 6-7 months, those would be the bars on the furthest right of the graph. You can see that starting probably last fall, the fall of 2024, where we like to see visa processing times somewhere in that 1 to 2 year timeline. We saw in the latter part of the summer last year where visa processing times jumped up to 30 and almost 36 months. Then we came back down just inside of that 24-month window at the new government fiscal year in October. But since that time, we've kind of been inching up a little bit to where we're now sort of in a 27, 28-month processing time. From that is measured from the time that a visa application is submitted until the time that a visa could be issued. Good news as it relates to the June Visa Bulletin is you can see the June processing bar is essentially the same as it was in the previous month. So the calendar moved forward a month, and more or less the visa processing times moved forward a month as well. So you can see right now a new application that's filed today All things being equal, if the priority dates were to advance month by month as the calendar advances, it would take somewhere in the range of 27 or 28 months for a new visa application to get to a point where a visa could be issued. Again, all things being equal. So I think it's just as we talk about, where are we at and what do we expect with regards to processing dates and visa bulletin, I think it's always good to have a perspective of what this has looked like over the recent past. And I think this chart is a really good way of indicating that. Dwight, could you maybe just share some comments on what the impact of COVID was on the processing of EB3 visas and any other thoughts that you have on the information that's represented here?
So a couple of things. The first is I'd point out that if you're talking specifically about nursing healthcare professionals, almost every single nursing healthcare professional falls into the EB3 category. So when visas are being allocated, there are various categories based on the job requirements, and nurses fall into the EB3 category. So when you look at the visa bulletin, that's the line that you're looking at. The second thing is that, a lot of people are not aware that the majority of family-based cases, so there's an allocation of visas for family-based cases, and then there's an allocation of visas for employment-based cases. The majority of family-based cases are processed at U.S. consulates, and the majority of employment-based cases are actually processed in the U.S. because many people who are getting those green cards are already in the U.S. working on other visa types, like an H-1B visa, for example. During COVID, when the consulates were shut down, many family-based cases, and it actually took the consulates, they closed for several months, and then when they reopened, they had significant restrictions on staffing and how many people were allowed into the building every day. So the processing of family cases was greatly slowed down. If family cases aren't used, then those of us on the employment side get the benefit of those cases being handed off to us and added to the 140,000 that we already are allocated. So what happened is during COVID, family cases weren't being processed, so a lot of visas became available for employment-based cases, and that's why you see that big drop in processing times. And many people are say to me that they're frustrated that these numbers are suddenly going back through the roof. But the truth of the matter is that what you see from basically the third quarter of 2023 to now is the numbers returning to where they were. The consulates are now processing more of those in family-based cases, which means that we're not getting the pour over, and that means there aren't as many visas available for the employment-based cases. So the numbers are returning back to where we thought. And for years, we have always said that EB3s for the Philippines and the rest of the world would be somewhere in that neighborhood of 18 to 30 months. So we've kind of just really normalized back to where we were before. And that is an explanation. And people who paid no attention to this before COVID would look at it and go, wow, the numbers were great during, the era right after COVID. And what's happened? Well, we're just returning kind of to where they've always historically been for quite a while.
Yeah, very good. CJ, if we can go to the next slide. So, given where we're at, I think it's worth just commenting briefly that the visa allocation of 140,000 a year that Dwight referenced earlier, these allocations rather are made based on the U.S. government's fiscal year. And that U.S. government fiscal year runs from October 1st through to September 30th. So every year in the month of October, this new annual allotment of 140,000 visas becomes available. So the question then is, given that we're now dealing with the June visa bulletin, and we still have a few months left to get to the end of the current government fiscal year, what do we expect to see happening between now and September of 2025? So, CJ, if we can go back to the previous slide for just a moment. So if we look at June to September in 2022, you can see where you were right in the middle of this sort of this flat period where, as Dwight mentioned, due to a lack of family-based applications being processed during COVID, we were seeing pretty consistent processing during this June to September time period in 2022. In 2023, we saw that as we got into Q3, so that was September, you can see all of a sudden there was a big jump up in the overall processing times. But then by the time we got to Q4, we started to see those processing times come down again as that new allotment of visas was working its way through the system. If we look at June of 2024, a year ago, essentially right now, we were somewhere just coming up to 20 months of processing time. And then as we got into the fourth quarter of July, August, September, each of those months we saw the visa processing times increase from 30, a little bit in the low 30s, middle 30s, and then almost up to 35 months before October came around. The next allotment of visas became available. And for a while there, we were back inside sort of that 24-month processing window. Of course, when it comes to visa processing times, what has happened in the past in no way, I think, can be relied on strongly in terms of informing us of what may happen in the future. But Dwight, just given your experience and given the situation we're currently in, what would be your assessment of what we're likely to see happen from now till September 30th related to priority dates and processing times?
So essentially, when we're looking at June, July, and August, we're looking at the end of the government's fiscal year, and they are always looking at that 140,000 number, trying to make sure that they don't go over that. And often what we see is either the processing time remains the same leading up to September or it slows some. And then normally in September, we see them really kind of slow down how many cases they accept. So that means the processing time jumps significantly. So I would think that essentially that's going to be what we see in the next few months is either it stays steady and then slowly winds down, or maybe it's a very difficult thing to say what exactly is going to happen because the government itself doesn't often know what it's going to be doing. They're just looking at it every month and saying, oh, it's too high, it's too low, we've got to adjust it. But we tend to see a slowing in the end of the year, tapering to them sometimes just saying they get to September and they say, we're sorry, we're out of visas, we're not going to process anymore. But the great thing is we always love October 1st because that's a reset, a whole new allocation of visas become available. And so you can't really extrapolate into the future in any significant way and say, oh no, August and September were bad, this means it's all going to bad. It's just the end of the year. They're finishing up, making sure they don't go over the number. They're slowing things down. And then we get a reset on October 1st, and then we continue on.
Yeah, very good. So given sort of this reality of the situation that it exists today, the likelihood that things are going to be static or processing times might even increase slightly here over the next couple of months, I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk to our candidates, our applicants that are on this presentation today, who I think generally fall into one of two categories. Either you're an individual that has already had EB3 visa application filed on your behalf, and you're at some stage in the process waiting, or you are an individual, maybe you've just recently passed the NCLEX exam, you have not yet started on your immigration journey to the US, and you are considering and thinking about, is this the right time for me to pursue my American dream? Is this the right time to start an immigration application, or should I wait until the processing times are shorter? So we're going to take a few minutes and address both of those groups, because I think the way that you view this issue is probably going to be a little bit different, but we want to provide you with useful information that hopefully will also be an encouragement to you. So CJ, if we could move forward, please. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So first of all, let me share a few words with applicants, candidates that already have a U.S. application in process. Maybe your petition was filed just 2 or 3 months ago. Maybe your petition has been in process already for 15 or 18 months, and you're in a more advanced stage of processing. I think there's a couple of things here that apply equally wherever you are at in the process. The first is to be proactive, even though it doesn't appear that much may be happening with your application. I think taking an attitude and a posture of being proactive, always knowing what the next step in your process is going to be, and ensuring that you are ready to complete that step at the earliest possible time, is a key strategy for you to be able to navigate and complete the overall immigration journey in the shortest possible time. If you have an immigration application pending and you do not currently hold a valid visa screen certificate, this is where you need to spend your time and attention to ensure that you are completing the required steps, whether you need to take one of the mandated English language tests. The visa screen application process takes time. There's nothing to be gained in putting it off. It's not going to get any cheaper. And in fact, if you are not attending to this in a timely way, and visa priority dates were to advance in a meaningful way, you might find yourself in a position of now having an embassy interview date available to you and not being in possession of a valid visa screen certificate. Now you're looking at expedite fees, possibly having to postpone your embassy interview. So if your application is in process, any stage of processing, and you don't hold a currently valid visa screen certificate, I would urge you in the strongest possible way to turn your attention to fulfilling those requirements. And then the last point I have here, it says, remember the glass is half full. And, this is maybe for our candidates under the heading of easier said than done. But there is a thought that I want to share with you here, and I'll ask Dwight to comment on this as well. Whether you expect to have to receive your visa in 6 months or 12 months, or maybe you thought you would have it 6 months ago, right? The not so great news is there is uncertainty around processing dates, and there is some uncertainty around how fast embassies schedule interviews. That's all true. But what is also true is the system works, the process works. The EB3 visa category that is used for the vast majority of nursing applications is a well-established, stable program. It's been, virtually unchanged for upwards of 25 or 30 years. So as frustrating as the wait may be, the truth and the reality that you can take confidence in is the system works. You may not know the exact date on which you will obtain a visa, but if your application has been properly filed, if you are being sponsored by a bona fide employer and you have provided all the information in your application is truthful and correct, there's a virtual 100% certainty that you are going to receive your visa, that you will arrive in the US as a permanent resident with the opportunity of living and working here and building a future for your family. So Dwight, could you just maybe add some color from your perspective on the EB3 program, its stability, and sort of, what I would call predictability?
So the first thing I'd like to do is go back, if I may, and add a quick comment about the visa screen process. So the visa screen involves three separate components. One is that your educational institution has to provide verification to the agency that issues the visa screen that you actually have an education that's the equivalent of a U.S. nursing education. The second component is if you have a professional nursing license anywhere in the world, you have to get verification that that's never been taken away from you for bad behavior. And then, as Ron said, the third component is an English language component. When you go to the agency that issues the visa screen and they give you an estimate for processing time, the single most important thing to understand is their estimate of the processing time doesn't start until they have received your academic credentials, until they've received verification that your license is in good standing, and your language piece. Sometimes we have people that encounter rather significant delays in getting the verification of their education. And so you have to you want, like Ron said, you want to start that as early as you can, because you don't know how long it's going to take to get the nursing board to send the verification or to get the academic institution to send the verification. So you really want to get started on that as quickly as you can, because even if you want to expedite it, you can't expedite it until they have those documents in hand. With regard to the process itself, I've been doing this a very long time, and I agree with what Ron said. It is simply a matter of getting everything in order, and then unfortunately sometimes having to wait a while before your process can be completed and you can have your green card and be in the US. But if you don't start, then you never are actually in line to make that move forward. And that's why you've got to get all the preliminary case parts of the process taken care of, so that so everything's filed, the application's approved, the visa's approved, and you're simply waiting for your application to go to the consulate and claim it. But the system, Ron's absolutely right. It works. And if you get involved and do everything you need to do, then you will eventually be in the US. As Ron said, you're just virtually guaranteed that once you've got everything in order and it's moving along.
Good. Thanks, Dwight. And I'd like to just build on that even a little further. CJ, if we can go to the next slide and move our focus on to those applicants that maybe are just considering getting an immigration application started, unsure as to what their next step should be, and you're asking yourself the question, should I start a visa application now? So building on the comments that Dwight just made, the answer to this question is, should I start a visa application now, is emphatically yes. Remember back to the comments about priority dates, right? Essentially, visa applications are processed on a first in, first out basis. So all things being equal, and this is an oversimplification, but in theory, a visa application received by USCIS on Monday, in theory, right, is going to be issued a visa ahead of an application received next Monday. So first in, first out. Your visa priority date is based on the date on which your application is received. So very simply, by deduction, it means the sooner your application is received, the more forward your point in the line will be. So the time to start an application, if you're in a position to do so, is now. Visa processing times are going to continue to fluctuate. They'll continue to fluctuate between now and the time that you file an application, and they will fluctuate during the time that your application is in process. But as Dwight said, if you never file an application, your visa processing time is essentially forever, because you need to get your place in line. As I said, uh, just because the visa processing dates are what they are today, they're not going to be that in the future. They may be better, they may not. The road will have some bumps along the way, but the destination is assured. Again, just to reinforce, if you meet all the requirements, you provide complete and truthful information in your application, you are being sponsored by a bona fide employer, right? Aside from a few of the bumps that you inevitably will encounter along the way, your destination and your outcome is assured. Your life could be different in the future, the life of your family, your extended family, and your family for generations to come. The most important thing is to take that first step and to get an immigration application filed on your behalf. So next, Dwight, if you would comment on one of the most common questions that we have when the topic of processing times comes up, and that is, well, can't I just get an H-1B visa? And CJ, if we could go to the next slide, I've called this the H-1B visa paradox. And Dwight, if you could maybe just share your thoughts on how the program could work, the pros and the cons of H-1B visas.
So an H-1B visa is a visa that is reserved for an individual that kind of essentially meets two baseline requirements. The first is the job that they're coming to the U.S. to do has to require at least the equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's degree. And then the second requirement is that the individual has to have the equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's degree. And obviously, the degree has to be in the field that's related to the job that's going to be done in the U.S. So unfortunately, in the United States right now, there is no state that requires any individual who's applying to be licensed as a registered nurse. No state requires them to have a bachelor's degree. So the U.S. government generally takes the position that what we would kind of essentially call staff nurses are not required to have a bachelor's degree, since they only have to have a 2-year associate's degree to be licensed, and therefore they don't believe that those individuals would be eligible for an H-1B visa. However, if you're performing a nursing job that has a higher level of educational and skill and experience required for it, then it's possible that an employer could file an application for an H-1B visa for you. But what they would have to show is that the job duties were of a nature sufficient that they required a bachelor's degree, and that they advertise for that, and that's their hiring practice with other employees. If that's the case, it's possible to have that petitioner file an H-1B visa for you. The benefit of doing that is that it lets you get to the U.S. and work on the H-1B visa while you're waiting for your green card application to be processed. Once you get to the U.S., that employer can then, if they choose, start a green card process for you, and you work on the H while that's going on. A couple of limitations that you also need to be aware of is that the government only gives out a limited number of H-1B visas every year, 85,000, and they receive many, many more applications than that. So they hold a lottery. So just because you found an employer that says they'll file an H-1B visa for you doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically going to be entitled to one. If it's an employer that doesn't meet certain requirements to be exempt from the limitation on how many visas are given out, you may have to be put in a lottery. They may be a challenge. The visa is very difficult to get. That may be a challenge. And then it's possible that the H-1B might not be extended by the government, even if it was initially issued to you. So H-1Bs can be fabulous, or they can kind of be extremely problematic. But one of the requirements I would say is that the way and to make yourself eligible, that, for example, most of my clients who file H-1B visas for nurses, they file them for nurses who are going to be working in critical care areas like ICU, ER, OR, NICU, PICU, areas like that. And so I would encourage you, while you're waiting for your application to be processed, if you're interested in H-1B, get that kind of work experience so that you can go to an employer and say, hey, I've got all of this experience in this critical care area. Would you be willing to try and place me in with a healthcare system that's looking for those people where you might be able to file an H-1B visa for me?
Okay. Would you agree, Dwight, with the comment that while EB3 visa applications are the outcome is highly predictable, that the outcome of an H-1B visa application is far less predictable?
Yes, yes, that is absolutely true. One other thing I would also note is that you are not allowed to pay for any of the cost of the processing of the H-1B visa. And unfortunately, there are people out there who are encouraging nurses. It's a very expensive process to file one of those visas. And there are less than credible employers that are asking nurses, hey, will you pay? We'll file this for you if you'll pay all the costs related to that, not understanding that sometimes they'll have a fairly limited chance of getting approved, and then unfortunately that nurse has spent an awful lot of money that they never should have done. So you have to be very careful in terms of vetting the H-1B. But yes, the green card process, high level of probability that it's going to be approved and you're going to be in the US, and the H-1B has nowhere near that level of assurance.
Maybe a bit of a almost unfair question, but if you had to take even a wild guess, of all the nurse visas that would be approved in a year, let's say this year, what would be your guess as to how many of those would be EB3s versus H-1Bs on a proportional basis?
I would say that that number, and I'm purely making this up, but it's got
Yep.
to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 95% of them or more are EB3s. And there's a very small number that are H-1Bs.
Right. Thank you for that. So just in wrapping up then the information that we've been able to share with you today, CJ, if we could go to the next slide. We'll just a few thoughts here to wrap up, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. And this is really what I want to leave everyone that's joined us today with. And that is the thought and the belief that you can do it, right? We've talked about how the EB3 program works on a first in, first out basis. This means the sooner you begin, the sooner you're going to be able to complete your journey. It doesn't matter what the processing times are today. In fact, if you're in the position of you have not yet started an immigration application to the US, you really don't need to pay any attention in the short term to what the visa processing times are. You need to be solely focused on getting an application underway, filed and underway for you, because until you do that, processing times really don't matter. The second thought, and we've touched on this numerous times today, that the EB3 process outcomes are highly predictable. If you follow the instructions, the directions, complete the requirements, you are virtually certain of receiving permanent residency EB3 visas. And processing times always have and always will fluctuate as time goes on. So I hope this information has been helpful to you. And we do have a few minutes remaining in our time today. So CJ, if you'd like to join us and jump in and lead us through some questions and answers.
Oh yeah, sure, Ron. I've seen the questions from the chat, and also I just want to shout out to all of our viewers. I've seen like different countries from the Philippines, UK, Ghana, Nigeria, UAE, Canada, and a lot more. Thank you for watching us today. So first question, Ron, it's from Arju. Will EB3 priority date move forward in upcoming visa bulletins?
Yeah, the answer is maybe, or maybe not. Again, I would just reiterate what Dwight shared at the beginning and what we've talked about throughout. We're optimistic that visa priority dates will move forward in October from whatever they might be in September. But what they may do between now and September is far more uncertain. But we would be very optimistic that come October, we'll see forward movement.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Next is from Joyce. Can a priority date change once you become documentarily qualified, or they'll remain like that till you get embassy interview invite?
Dwight, I'll let you take that one.
So unfortunately, the rule is that your priority date has to be current on the day that the officer is prepared to approve your visa during your interview at the consulate. So if you became documentarily qualified and then in the interim they moved the visa dates back, then unfortunately that would mean that your case would go back into the waiting line until the priority date became current again.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Dwight. Next question. Let me see here. How does the H-1B cap exemption work for healthcare employers, and could that offer a faster path for nurses than EB3 in certain cases?
Dwight, I'll let you take that one as well.
So I could spend about 3 hours talking about the cap, but essentially what I would say is that there is an exemption from the lottery so that your H-1B would not have to go through the lottery. It requires an employer that meets certain requirements I'm not going to outline now. But the bigger question is, would it provide an opportunity to get to the US faster? And the answer is yes, absolutely. But with this limitation, even the cases that are filed pursuant to the exemption still have to meet the same requirement, which is, does the job require a bachelor's degree? Does the individual have a bachelor's degree? And then you again encounter all the problems we talked about earlier, which is those are cases that are pretty difficult to get approved. But yeah, it would be faster if you could get one approved through with a cap exempt employer.
Okay, thanks, Dwight. Another question is, are there any advantages if I choose to work in a rural or underserved area in the US in terms of processing speed?
The short answer to that question is no. There are no special visa programs for nurses. We're talking specifically about nurses that would help to expedite your application if you're working in rural or underserved areas. Many, many years ago, there was a visa program that did target those areas where there was an expedited path, but no such path exists today.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Next question is from Apio. Can one start the immigration process before getting an employer?
Dwight?
So the answer is no. Interestingly, and this is different than some other countries in the world, but in the US, you have to have an employer that sponsors you for the visa. Now, I guess I should say this. It depends on what you mean by the word start. Can you apply, take NCLEX? Can you apply for a US nursing license? Can you do the visa screen process without an employer? Absolutely. But in terms of filing that application to get you a place in line, no, that has to be done with a US employer that's willing to sponsor you.
Okay, thanks, Dwight. And another question is from Mubarak. This is about H-1B. How is the conversion of H-1B to EB3 done, and how long will it take?
Dwight?
So essentially, they're two separate tracks. The H-1B is a temporary work visa that allows you to work in the US. If you get to the US on an H-1B and your employer then says, we're willing to sponsor you for a green card, then the timeline becomes identical to what the timeline would be if you were outside the US and you didn't have an H-1B. So that employer has to file their visa application asking for you to have a visa, and then you've got to go and you get your ticket, you get in line, you start waiting, and then when your priority date becomes current, you're allowed to file that last the second part of the application. But the difference is now you're filing the application while you're in the US. It's the equivalent in the timeline. If you're outside the US, you go to the consulate to claim your green card. If you're in the US, you'll file the application while you're in the US to claim your green card. But the timeline really depends on how quickly the priority dates move. And then once you've filed that application to claim your green card, if you're in the US, right now that takes about a year to be completed. But the whole number is kind of really difficult to predict.
Okay. Next question is from Raz. What is the basis in giving the embassy interview? Is it the PD or the DQ date?
That's another one for you, Dwight.
So all the priority date controls everything. All the documentarily qualified date says is what you can't. So you got to have both. You can't go to your interview at the consulate unless your priority date is current, and you also can't go to the interview at the consulate unless you've been documentarily qualified. But at the end of the day, the one that really matters is the priority date. The DQ date is just when they've said, we've looked at your application, everything's good, you're now ready to wait to have your interview scheduled.
Thanks, Dwight. And here's an interesting question from Bruno. I'm seeing a lot of green card holders being deported. Could this also affect nurses?
So it's interesting. So that's a fascinating question that we could, again, talk about for hours. But I would essentially say this. 99% of all people who are in, how's this? The government has to have a reason to take your green card away from you and then place you in removal proceedings to deport you from the US. So if you're in the US and you're not engaged in criminal activity, you're not engaged in some unusual political activity that's problematic, for example, you're supporting a terrorist group or something like that, then you're not going to have any problem. They're just not randomly going through the list of everyone who's been given a green card and saying, we're going to take all these people and kick them out. The people that are having their green cards revoked are having those revoked because they've done something that's inconsistent with their status. That's a problem. And so I would say that as long as you have all your affairs in order and you come to the US and you're compliant with US immigration law, that's not something that you should be concerned about. Although I will add one other pitch for this. As many people are not aware that when they submit their applications, the government for their green card, the government is now evaluating their social media activity, asking you to submit a list of your accounts, access to them, what usernames you use. And so you certainly want to be prudent in terms of, while I'm not saying don't exercise your right to speak your opinions about various things, you might want to be a little bit careful in the types of posts that you're making to social media so that you don't show up in an interview and suddenly they're asking you about your sponsorship of a terrorist group or you're engaging in some kind of criminal activity that's problematic. But other than that, people who are in the US green cards, they should, and I know a lot of people are worried, but that's not really something they should be worried about right now.
Agree with that very, very strongly.
Okay, very well said. And here's our last question for today. And also, if you have more questions or if you have specific questions, please reach out to your case managers. And also, I'll put our live chat, live chat link in the chat so you can continue to ask questions to our live recruiters. So here's our last question. This is from Malini. Can you add your husband at your interview stage if you get married after your petition is filed?
Dwight?
So the answer is yes. This also happens because obviously there's a delay sometimes before your green card interview if you have a baby, and so you've added a new family member. So it's possible to go to the Department of State and say, I have a new family member that I need to add to the process, and you're allowed to do that before your interview. And then after your interview, there are ways to do that as well, but you really would want to get it taken care of before the interview if at all possible.
Okay, thanks, Dwight. Thanks, Ron. So that's it for a Q&A session. And before I give back the pass the mic to Ron and Dwight, I'll just check this out, the links. So please like us on Facebook for any immigration updates and new positions that we have. And also we're also doing webinars weekly. I'll put the chat on the link. So please like us on Facebook, and also um, our referrers program. So earn up to $250 when you referred an RN. And if their petition is filed, you don't need to wait for years for your reward. Plus, there's no limit to how many nurses you can refer or how much you can earn. So start referring today. Okay. So any last thoughts, Ron and Dwight?
Yeah, so just one or two things before we wrap up here today. First of all, Dwight, thank you very much for sharing your experience and expertise. I'm absolutely confident that those that have joined us today have benefited greatly from your input. As CJ mentioned, our commitment is to provide useful, meaningful, accurate information, not just on visa processing times, but on every aspect of the international recruiting process, the relocation process, transition to clinical practice, establishing yourself and your family in the US. And to do that, we do offer informational webinar sessions on a weekly basis on a wide variety of topics. And the very best way for you to stay connected and be aware of what these upcoming webinar presentations may be is to follow us on one of our social media channels. Some topics will be of more interest to you than others, depending upon where you might be at in the process. But please stay connected so that you can benefit from our commitment of providing this level of information, not just to our existing candidates, but to anyone that is interested. You can do it, whatever stage of the process you're at. Do not lose hope. Do not lose heart. You can do it. The EB3 process works. The H-1B process is not a silver bullet. We're always optimistic when October rolls around that processing times are going to get better. And with that, Dwight, just any last thoughts that you would have as we wrap up today?
I would just, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure being here. And then I would just simply encourage, as we've said multiple times, get started on the process as quickly as you can. Get your place in line, and before you know it, the time will have passed. You'll have had your interview, and you'll be on your way to the U.S.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you, CJ. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please feel free to share the link to this recording from our YouTube channel with your friends and colleagues. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. And up until we do so, thank you and bye for now.